Okay, you should all be able to see a very, very simple mind map. So this is what we're going to cover today in this session. So it's sort of an overview and a little bit of a sort of a tour from my point of view in the work that I've been doing. So I sit on the UK Cooperative Governance Expert Reference Group, and one of my particular interests is how we adapt co-op governance and co-op corporate law in the UK to fit what we're hoping to do in sociocracy. So that's basically what this talk is about. I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to UK legal forms, and that might even be news to some of you that are UK based. We're going to look at the typical governance arrangements in UK cooperatives. So I should stress that while I'm using UK cooperatives as my particular interest, a lot of the issues that you're going to raise should be universal. So wherever your jurisdiction that you're registering a co-op is, these same issues should come up as well. So don't worry too much if you're not UK based. Then I'm going to look at the fit of our current cooperative governance models to sociocracy. So what is a good fit? Where is their coherence, and where are the areas of clunkiness? And then I'm going to look at some of the options that I've explored around that, what I call circling the square. So how can we get them both to work together? So this is a sort of quick overview of the legal structures that are available in the UK. This is about 99% what's available. There are some really weird and wonderful things, and this is basically what we've arrived at over centuries of corporate legal forms, starting from things that had to be established by royal decree and companies that were created to basically go out and pillage the rest of the world, like the East India Company and things like that. But this is where we've arrived at the moment, and it's quite a complicated family tree. Over on the left-hand side, we've got the sort of the way the law views you if you just start doing stuff. So there's nothing to stop you. Even in the UK, you can start trading as a cooperative without establishing any corporate legal form around that. So if you're just doing it as yourself, as an individual, the law will regard you as a sole trader. If you're doing it with other people, it will regard you as a partnership. And if you're doing it with other people without a view to making profit, then it will regard you as an unincorporated association. So we have lots of voluntary organizations that they draw themselves up a constitution that agrees how they relate to each other, but they don't have to register with anyone. They don't register with the taxman or anything like that. But if you're a trading cooperative, you will almost certainly have to choose one of these things over on the right here, which creates a separate new legal person that your co-op can be inside. You're actually that's what the term incorporation means. It's a new person in law, and that person can enter into contracts, can employ people, etc. And we've got these 4 different sort of main branches of this family tree. We've got the company branch, which is basically what's evolved from those sort of exploitative company structures that have evolved down the centuries. We've got a public limited company, which are the companies that are traded on stock exchanges. So the big things that own our utilities, like British Gas and things like that. We have private company limited by shares, which are traditionally for profit, where people get together, they pool their resources in the form of shares, and normally the more shares you've got, the more power you've got. So this is highlighted in green. That shows it can still be used for a co-op. Then there's a company limited by guarantee, which is the same as the company limited shares really in how it operates, but there is no shares there. Members just guarantee to pay a small token amount, normally £1, towards the debts if the whole thing goes wrong, but their personal liability is limited. And then for each of these 3, in 2005, our government created another legal form for the emerging social enterprise sector then, which they called a community interest company. And all they did was they bolted it on to these existing 3 company forms. So it has a few extra things that have to be in the governing document. And again, you can be a community interest company limited by shares or a community interest limited by guarantee. And then down here, we've got the society legal form, which is what evolved from the early cooperative movement, the friendly society, mutual insurance and things like that, particularly in the Manchester region. So they've evolved into a completely different branch of legal forms that are traditionally democratic, work for community good or for mutual benefit. And they have a few interesting bells and whistles on them that allow you to do things like raise finance from communities as well. So a lot of my work is involved with these. And then finally, we have this thing called a limited liability partnership, which I think you have something similar, certainly in the US, which is basically an incorporated version of this partnership thing over here, mainly used by professionals like lawyers and doctors, who they all operate their own individual practice, but they come together in a legal practice or a doctor's practice and operate as something more coherent. But it has been used by co-ops, so particularly co-ops of consultants and things like that. So there are quite a few worker co-ops set up as LLP. So we've got, what have we got there? 7 different legal forms that you can use for a cooperative in the UK, all of which give you issues around running that co-op sociocratically. And I should say early on, when I'm talking about sociocracy in an organization, I'm talking about 2 sort of overlapping things really. So I think of it as like a hardware and a software. So your hardware is like your structure, you know, where your board is, how it relates to the members and things like that. And then the software side, which you can use in pretty much any organization, is more about the meeting technology, how you interact sociocracy within a given circle, or within a group or team within that organization. So I'm mainly going to be talking about the hardware side in it, but it does, some of the stuff does bleed over in more of the software side. Okay. Right, there's not enough of you on the board to get you to sort of interact and indicate where you are on this. So I'll move along. It'll just give us more time for chat. But is there anyone got any questions where we are? This is sort of like setting the foundation for what I'm going to go on to now. If you have got a question, just unmute yourself and shout it out.
A quick question.
Yeah.
I clicked on the link, but I've just got a blank board for up there. So.
Okay. Let's just live with that for the moment. I will share the board afterwards as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you tried zooming out? Because mine was blank to start with.
Cheers, Owen.
Scroll back.
Yeah. I've only got Owen and Lizzie on the board at the moment, so yeah, don't worry about it. It was just a cherry on the cake type thing. It's not critical to the presentation. So let's look at different types of governance that we get in cooperatives, and this is generic across the world, and also a lot of this applies to organizations that aren't cooperatives as well. So we've got 3 organizations represented here by circles. So everything inside the circle is a member of that organization. So for instance, how many have we got here? 1 to 7. We've got 10 people in this cooperative organization here. So typical of a small worker cooperative, say. And in collective governance, all that collective bit means is all of those members are also directors. Because that's one thing, certainly under UK law, organizations have members. They're the people who own and control the organization. They're the people who can vote to wind it up and take, you know, serious strategic changes of direction in that organization. So that's the membership. So they generally meet in general meeting and they have ultimate power. And that applies to most organizations, not just cooperatives. And all the collective means is that they're also directors, because the law also requires that we have directors, and this is almost like an inheritance of that company corporate form, where the members were basically rich shareholders who were pooling their capital in order to you know, build a canal or a railway or send a ship out whaling, but they employed directors who basically ran the organization for them, that those directors were elected by them and could be removed by them and were ultimately accountable to them. So that sort of relationship is preserved into all our legal structures. Is you have the members who own the organization, who generally elect a smaller amount of people, and in a co-op that's normally from the members, to be a board or a committee or a governance, and they can meet. They're smaller, they're more agile, they can meet frequently, and they also have, in UK law, they have a lot of duties and responsibilities by virtue of that fact that they're being given trust by the members. So they're also being given a lot of the members' powers as well. So that's the difference between these first two here. Here, all of members are also directors, and that can persevere into quite large organizations. So Abby's doing a workshop about Unicorn Grocery. They're up to over 60 members, and all of their members are also directors. But typically, once you get over about sort of 7 or 8 people, you generally elect a smaller board. So these members here will elect these directors here, and in a co-op, they'll elect them from amongst their number. So it may be that as a member of a co-op, you're on the board for a year, you come off, you go back on a couple of years, and there's a rotation through. So we call that committee governance. And then this third circle here is just to represent many of our co-ops are what we call multi-stakeholder co-ops. So they're not just workers, they're not just customers, they're not just investors, but they're a mixture of all three. And it's quite common then for, say, one class of member to elect a place onto the board to ensure you've got the representation of those classes. But the governments then, it works exactly the same. And I often use this metaphor here down below of your governance is like a ship. So your board are the people up on the bridge that are elected by everyone else on the ship, and they are plotting the course, monitoring progress against the course, and looking out for icebergs. That's their responsibility to the rest of the crew. But at any time, the crew can call a meeting and replace them. So I tend to use that ship metaphor quite a bit. And then we've got a sort of sociocratic circle diagram, which is slightly different to what we've got before, because we've got this inclusion of a general circle here. And when I first started to work with organizations, co-ops that are exploring sociocracy, I was coming from this, we've got a general meeting with all the members in it, who elect a smaller group who meet as the board. How do we fit this into a sociocratic circle diagram? And I experimented with several different things, and that's what I'm going to go on and talk about now. And when I started doing that, I found that in some cases there was a clunkiness, and in some places there was a coherence. So what was already in the law basically was a pretty good fit with sociocracy anyway. So if I just nip back to here, so we've got this principle is that we have a general circle in the center, and this is almost like the ultimate authority within the organization. It has subsidiary circles, which have different roles, one of which may be a circle here that holds the mission of the organization. And one of the things I'm going to come on to is this looks quite like a board committee. What it's being asked to do has a strong crossover there, but there is no general meeting here. And the other key thing around it is double linking. So every circle has 2 links, one down and one back up to the circle above it. So the clunkiness is that certainly directors, and if your mission circle is your board of directors, they have to be elected by and generally from the members. There's no role of the general circle in choosing who goes on that. And that's one of the things you can't get round. The other thing is consent-based decision-making. UK law defines majority voting, particularly for important decisions like changing the governing document, winding up the organization, appointment of auditors and things like that. They are decisions that are sort of hardwire into law that if a certain percentage of the membership or the members at a meeting agree, it has to happen. Okay, so that's rubbing up against that consent-based decision making. And then we've got this other thing that rather than a central circle being the sort of like the pinnacle of any hierarchy, the general meeting, which is all the membership, they are the supreme authority in the cooperative. and early sociocracy diagrams I saw basically just avoided having general meetings at all. The whole co-op never met. Where there was some coherence and some places where we could play and you know, a little bit of a grey area we could work in, most legal duties directors in the UK have this duty to achieve consensus. So we've already got something there that we can work with. While it often defines things quite hard, the law rarely defines what process you have to use to get there. So if there was a decision that requires 75%, say, to change the governing document, to change how it could distribute profit, for example, there would be nothing to stop you going through a consent-based decision-making process in order to come to the decision, and then just formally having a 75% vote in order to sort of tick the boxes needed for corporate law. And the other thing is that delegation to subcommittees by boards is a well understood and codified process. So the process of creating subsidiary circles is already something that's quite well understood. So we can use that as well. So I came up, not all at the same time, but particularly working with those early worker co-ops, we tried 3 different ways of doing it. The first way, and I'm going to have diagrams for these, so don't worry about understanding just from going through them. How about if because we have to have a general meeting and we have to have a board. So my first option that I'm going to explore with you is that we make the general circle in the middle the general meeting. Okay. The second is we make that the board, and then the third, which will need a little bit more explanation, is we treat that general circle as a collective CEO, Chief Executive Officer. And that'll make more sense when I show you the examples. So this first one where we make so this circle in the middle here, we make that the board. So the general meeting elects the board then elects a general circle. It creates subcommittees or subcircles or daughter circles, and you can have this 2-way linking in here. The difficulty with that arises is if this circle here puts someone up here onto the board, they're now a director in law and they haven't been elected by the membership. But there's generally powers for board to co-opt people in. So we can work around that. And I tried this with a worker cooperative down in London in the early days, and it was okay, but it still felt quite clunky and didn't work really well. So what I'm saying is it's possible to do this, where just make the board your central circle, but also bear in mind that the general circle, it does a lot more of the day-to-day, the executive, the running the organization. So it does a lot more of the duties on the ship, like making the ship is running, like stoking the boilers and cooking the food and things like that, and coordinating all that. Whereas what the board should be doing is it should be up on the bridge looking out for icebergs. So if you do this, you really run the risk that the board just focused on the day-to-day stuff and is not looking out for the icebergs. So I don't recommend this way of doing it. Whoops. So the second option then is to make the general meeting the general circle. So all of the members are in the center there. But however, if you're like Unicorn and you've got 60 members, then you've got a 60-member meeting. You're losing one of the advantages of sociocratic ways of working, where you've got small circles that can make decisions quickly and easily. And also you've got exactly the same problem you had in the first model, is that the general meeting here is now getting bogged down in the day-to-day stuff. So the general meeting would normally only meet once or twice a year just to approve the accounts. And now it's having to do the coordination of the running. So again, apart from in very small co-ops, this doesn't really work. In small co-ops, you tend to get a blurring of that strategic and executive, that up on the bridge and stoking the boilers activity anyway. So certainly this could work in very, very early days. And the board up here is just a mission circle that's elected by the general circle here. Okay.
Excuse me.
Yep.
What are the 1, 2, and 3 in this model? What are those little circles that are not the board?
They're just daughter circles. So there might be, so in a worker cooperative, there might be human resources or finance, or they might be functional areas as well. So it might be logistics, it might be sales, that sort of thing. So what you might think of as departments within
Departments within operations, not governance.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So up here, you've got the board here, which is which we might call a mission circle, which would still be operating, having that strategic looking out for icebergs thing. It then could have its own subsidiary circle, the same way that any of these could create subsidiary circles as well, in the way that we normally see sociocratic organizations grow, almost like fractally by budding off new circles. Okay, but the solution that I finally settled on was an adaptation of this. So this is sort of traditional governance within an organization, where you would have maybe even a shareholder company. So you'd have your shareholders who elect a board of directors, who appoint a chief executive who sits at the top of a pyramid, a hierarchy. And again, these would be the sort of departmental heads here. Okay. Not my problem with this sort of way of working, apart from these hierarchies here, is this real sort of point of failure here of one person. So you've got one very, very powerful role here. And as part of this as well, I also looked at a form of governance called Carver governance, or policy governance, which is quite popular in sort of university sectors, the voluntary, the charitable sector, where they would have a board of trustees, a chief executive who would sit at the top of the people who actually did the work. And the idea with policy governance is the board here, it doesn't get involved in the day-to-day stuff at all. Basically, it sets policy. It gives the chief executive, right, this is where we want to go. This is how we've got to go there, and these are the things you definitely can't do. So, and it doesn't interfere apart from that. It's the chief executive's job to achieve that and then report back on it. So, for instance, in the UK, the Permaculture Association is run this way. So there's a large membership of people like me who are interested in permaculture. We elect a board of trustees. They appoint a chief executive, nice chap called Andy Goldring, who sits atop and coordinates the actual day-to-day coordinating and operation activity within the Permaculture Association. So I thought, how's about we just replace the chief executive with a circle? So that's what I came up with here. So this green thing was the chief executive. Now it's just a general circle. And again, it can have those daughter circles, which would be that 1, 2, 3, 4 on my previous diagram. The members still elect a board. So this is the mission circle here. It can have its own circles here. And actually, when I started to look at this, it was actually how an organization I was working with at the time was running. So I sit on the board of Co-operatives UK, which is the trade body for co-ops in the UK. I'm in this yellow circle, and we had a period of about 8 months without a chief executive. And we just had all of the sort of heads of the different areas, what we call our management team. They were meeting effectively as this general circle here. So this isn't anything outlandish and anything that different. All we're doing is pulling the chief executive out of traditional corporate structures and replacing it with a circle in there to be that person. It's actually also very similar to how Suma Whole Foods, our largest worker co-op in the UK, how they used to run. They have a management committee for this yellow circle. The green circle here was what they called their FAC committee, functional area coordinators. So they weren't running sociocratic processes within their meetings, but their structure was actually sociocratic. They just didn't realize it at the time. So that's the way the co-ops that I'm developing now and the governing documents that I'm developing now are with this model in mind. And this is what I'm suggesting is the way forward for sociocratic arts, particularly in the UK, but the same issues will arise around the world. The clunkiness that remains, so there's the things that we can't still get round. The mission circle still has to be elected by the members. So if I nip back, you almost think of the members here. Remember I was saying, where do you put the general meeting? Well, you just put it around everything. It's almost like a meta circle. But these people here still elect these people here, okay? And they don't do that using a selection process. It's done by voting. Those people in the mission circle, they're still in law directors, and they have to be registered as directors. So if you've got people there who are disqualified from acting as directors for any reason, that's going to cause you a problem. You don't want to get them on that mission circle.
Excuse me?
Yep.
How do the people get into that? I understand the members elect the mission circle, like the board, but how do you get into the circle that used to be the general manager? Well,
it's going to be an evolutionary process, and that's one of the questions that's unanswered at the moment. So I'm a member of an organisation called Platform 6 Development Co-operative at the moment, that we are going through this process where it's just this at the moment. We're just yellow, elected by the members, and we're trying to move to this. Now, the way we're doing it is creating sub-circles here, and then when we've got enough sub-circles to make it worth having a general circle. So at the moment, we're basically doing the green stuff in here as well. At some point, when we've got enough functional circles, the people from those circles will form the general circle along with someone from the mission circle as well. So even if you're not a cooperative, this is a typical, this sort of how do you grow from just one circle to 2 to 3 to 4 is something that's still being explored. So that's the same way that any other circle will eventually reproduce, is it's almost like a future circle would be an item on an agenda, on a standing item on an agenda. And when it got so that item was dominating a part of the meeting, at that point, it would then split out into its own circle. So you'd keep everything in one circle until it became 2 circles, and then 3 circles and 4s. So you'd just be almost like spinning out agenda items when they started to dominate. Does that make sense?
No, I still don't know how the people get chosen to the general circle that replaces the chief executive.
Okay, so they would be chosen to be representatives of the daughter circles, which up to that point had either been sub-circles of the board or the mission circle, or they'd just been activities within the board. So the idea is this meeting here, it's coordinating the activities of all these areas here and reporting back up to the mission circle. Is that any better?
It looks the same as the thing on the other side, but more people in it. Maybe I'm the only person that's confused.
I suppose the easy answer to your question is it depends, and it's up to you. So I'm not saying, and that's the other thing I like about how Sociocracy is going, is it's not like, here's a set of rules, you have to do it this way. It's almost like, here's a pattern language, and there are certain underlying things that we really like, like the consent-based decision-making, the subsidiarity, the distribution of power. And then we're almost like an ecosystem of organizations that are experimenting with this. So this is where I am at the moment, is that this circle here would just be a meeting of representatives from all these circles where they're just coordinating their activity.
Hi, maybe I've misunderstood, but just yeah. I think that was a really good question. It was one that was going through my mind. But so it seems to me that what you could do is look at the general manager not as an individual, but as a set of functions and responsibilities, like you would for any of the, I think you've called them daughter circles. And if you look at it as a sense of functions and responsibilities, then the general circle, would it just appoint people to that to perform those functions and responsibilities in the same way that it would for any other functional circle? It's just that it's functions that are, I guess, they're at a higher level. So you could adopt the same principles, but it's that the function is at a higher level than maybe some of the other, daughter circles. Is that right, or have I got that wrong?
No, I think that's right. Yeah, and I'll give you an example of how so Platform 6 Development Co-operative at the moment, we've got a sort of crowdfunding we're running an instance of a thing called Open Collective. And at the moment, that is in our meeting where we talk about everything else. And so at the moment, we're talking about spinning that out into its own circle. And the way we will do that is saying, right, who are the people who in our meetings are knowledgeable about and basically reporting to everyone else about what's going out? They would be the members of that circle. So we're getting them to draw up the domain of that circle. So what it will do, what its terms of reference would be. And then we as the mission circle say, right, that looks good, off you go. And then we'll, from that point on, rather than having to have a big chunk of our meeting taken up with that stuff, we'll just have a standing item report from Open Collective Circle or whatever we end up calling it. So it's like the how do people get on is almost like it's hardwired in that process where you create the original one and it will be like the founders at that point. But then that circle will have its own autonomy as well. So it will decide who's on that circle. And it may even be people from outside the organization, or it may be members from in it.
I had a question on the double linking. I guess it still seems difficult for me to reconcile that kind of like bi-directional aspect with something like a board, the hierarchy of a board, a CEO, directors, and then employees or members or workers. Are there issues with the double linking in these structures? Because it seems to me that in double linking, the agency kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yes, they are. And it's one of the remaining clunkiness things. The UK law has no concept, can't get its head around the double linking. But UK law is only concerned with how do people get into the yellow circle, onto the board. And that's it. So you can sort of, you wouldn't be defining this stuff in your governing document. You would just give circles the power to create subcircles and leave everything else open. But bear in mind that some UK co-ops are not using double linking. So it's one of the things that people are experimenting with. But certainly there's no way you can have double linking between the whole member circle and the smaller board. It has to be that they elect a smaller number of their member onto that board. Owen, you've got your hand up.
Could I just raise, I think one of the things here is whether you're looking at it growing sociocracy from a small organization outwards, or you're actually trying to impose it or bring it into a much larger organization. And in that case, I don't think the claim can be made, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Mark, that sociocracy is like a panacea or a cure or whatever for entrenched leadership, for the same people being elected as the representatives year after year. Those kind of issues aren't kind of, to my mind, unless there's something out there that tells us otherwise, that's not automatically solved by sociocracy. That entrenched thing is another part of a cultural shift, I think, like that has to be addressed separately. I don't think sociocracy fixes like your manager who's been the manager for 8 years and may not be the best person anymore, but still is.
That's a great question and a great point. Twice in the last 6 months, I've been asked to do some consultancy for large cooperatives where they'd heard about sociocracy and they thought, brilliant, there's a silver bullet that's going to solve our underlying cultural problems, and it don't. It might make them less likely to occur in the future within an organization, but it is definitely not a silver bullet. And certainly if there are underlying problems there, you need to go in and address those. It may be that sociocracy might be part of the solution, but it's not a magic trick. So I've only got a couple more slides to go. We've got just under 9 minutes. So let me rattle through my slides and then we'll use the rest of the time with any further comments and questions. So I've already done this one. So these are the three remaining bits of clunkiness that we can't, we can get to 95% sociocracy, but the law still is causing us problems. And then finally, just a couple of quotes I use in my general governance work. I love this T.S. Eliot quote, that they constantly try to escape from the darkness outside and within by dreaming of systems so perfect that no one will need to be good. One of my colleagues, Bob Cannell, is fond of quoting that culture eats governance for breakfast, or culture eats strategy for breakfast. Okay, there is a tendency, I think, with some bits of sociocracy to just think we can create the perfect structure and then it doesn't matter who we pour into it, like empty co-ops, it will work. Treating it very much like an operating system, but actually it's around building a culture, and it's a lot more complicated than that, and it's a lot more messy because we've got people in there. And then a Voltaire quote, which translates as in his writings, a wise Italian said that the best is the enemy of the good. So that's the other thing, is not trying to design something absolutely perfect. But the real thing I really like about that sociocratic way of working, that's good enough for now, safe enough to try, which is how, you know, I've tried all of these things I'm talking about. Let's try it in an organization within 6 months, see how it works, and then come back and review it. Rather than I come in as a consultant and say, right, here is how you need to structure yourself. And then if it doesn't work, you can't be doing it right. So you need to pay me to come back and tell you what you're doing wrong. So that's the sort of what I try and get across in my work, that we're part of an exploration. And all I'm really sort of showing you here is this is as far as I've got at the moment. And I'm working with lawyers at the moment to try and design governing documents that are acceptable, particularly to the Financial Conduct Authority who registers societies, that we can register sets of governing documents that fit sociocracy. They maybe don't have, you know, every single thing that you might want to do down to how you run your meetings in there, but we can define that in secondary governance documents. But at least we haven't got that clunkiness there.